Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, the headline reads, David Cameron warns of looming second global crash. He went on to say that red warning lights are flashing on the dashboard of the global economy, and there is no debating this. Only more money printing for the rich and austerity for the poor will do. No debate. Double down on our elite policy. Of course, had you watched this program and others like it, you would have been forewarned of this looming crash, and by our forewarning you, the mainstream propagandists and bankster cheerleaders said, oh, that's so anti-capitalist of the Keiser Report. Let's ban this speech. The ordinary masses must not be able to debate such matters. No, no, no. They should be left to the lovey class instead. How dare Keiser Report let the people consider that massive leverage and even more massive fraud leads to financial crashes, for that will lead to solutions unfavorable to our elite, oh so superior opinions. No, we must have no debate, no debate.
Yes, Max, that was David Cameron upon returning from Australia, the G20 summit. Of course, he never mentioned all the fraud, all the crimes being committed in his own home country, over which he rules, over which he is allegedly the leader. He didn't mention those, no. Who he blamed for this so-called global crash. I mean, the headline read, David Cameron warns of looming second global crash. He blamed Russia and Europe for the decline in the UK exports, for example.
The crash is baked into the cake because of what we've been saying for the last 2 years. Since the last crash, there was no reform of the system. They didn't get rid of the fraudsters. They didn't get rid of the infinite rehypothecation. They didn't get rid of any of the tricks used by the banks or the accountants to commit these massive frauds. So they built this huge bubble up in the real estate market, in the stock market, and in the bond market. And they did it on the backs of the poor with austerity measures that were not really austerity measures because the debt in the UK has escalated. Both the deficit and the debt are hitting astronomical high levels of absurdity. And here comes David Cameron talking about this looming crash that we've been talking about for a while. So his recovery scenario is a hoax. There was never a recovery. The Osborne and Cameron recovery never happened. There was a debt increase that pumped up prices of assets, but there was never a recovery. He needs to look in the mirror. It's not Putin's fault that David Cameron is a financial illiterate who basically pushed and propagandized for bond-selling banks. That's not Putin's fault. Be a man. Be a man, Dave. Don't blame. I mean, it's so sad what happened at G20. I think Putin left early because the whole thing started to turn into an episode of Glee.
Well, he said it is because he had a long flight home. So whatever, that's not the point of this. What the point is that here we have, oh, by the way, to be fair and balanced, David Cameron, George Osborne, they all agree that their policies are the best. And the mainstream media, the entire BBC, they all believe their policies are the best. But here, let's look at the real situation of what David Cameron's government has created. And they're blaming all their problems now on Europe and on Russia. Well, their national debt, according to Liam Halligan, is up from £580 billion in 2007 to an astonishing £1.4 trillion today. And it's due to be £1.6 trillion by 2017-2018. Also, if you're in a consumer economy, you need the wages to rise. Well, in 2007, the average weekly wage was £480. Now it's £540. No, the opposite. It's £540 back in 2008, and it's now £480 today. So that's obviously gone down. That means people can consume less or spend less, unless, of course, they incur more leverage. Well, and the pound has fallen by 20% on a trade-weighted basis since 2008, and yet their trade deficit is increasing. So the latest numbers are that exports were worth £310 billion in 2013. Imports were $420 billion. That's a gap of £110 billion.
Right, so by every measure, the UK economy is shrinking and doing poorly.
So their policies are to blame. They are to blame. Nobody else is to blame. Of course, let's be fair and balanced, they don't think they're to blame.
That's right. Their policies, as we've been saying, have created this stew, this mix of failure. And I mean, the debt levels are really astounding. You know, here, the reason the global economy crashed in 2008 is because these major bankers and economies overextended their global credit card, essentially.
And fraud. fraud.
Yeah, using fraudulent techniques. So the response from the central banks was to expand their credit limits. So now here we are 7 years later, and they've reached their credit limits again, and there's going to be another crash.
So he also said this. He said he claims that the G20 communique hammered out over the past few days endorsed Britain's determination to use monetary policy to support growth, and he would not waver on his policy of paying down government debt. Well, first of all, as we showed you, you have not been paying down government debt, so stop that propaganda. You have not. The numbers have risen from 580 billion to 1.4 trillion. That's a larger number. Okay, to be fair and balanced, a lot of people think 1.4 trillion is less than 540 billion if you use certain accounting measures. Blah, blah, blah. You could package it and re-securitize it and rehypothecate it, and it might be worth less to them. Okay,
Yeah.
But it's not.
They say they're going to continue paying down the debt while it keeps expanding.
Yes.
It's like, we will continue to beat you until morale improves.
Or it's like having two credit cards with 100,000 each on them, and then using one to pay down some of the debt on the other one, but it increases the debt on that credit card, and you say, well, I've paid down some of my debt on that credit card number 2.
When I see Cameron and Osborne standing next to each other, it reminds me of that photo of Kim Kardashian that was just released.
Yes.
Two cheeks of the same and that is huge, and that's the debt. That's a UK debt. If people want to understand UK debt and put into popular culture terms that most people in this country would have a little bit more access and understanding, think of Kim Kardashian's as your deficit and your debt, or Osborne and Cameron's face on the two cheeks. I mean, that's the, okay, now do you get it? And that enormous, the waste that's only like, very, very tiny, that's the austerity. That's what they're asking you to live on. That itty bitty 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 waste, while everyone else is living on the fat and huge bulbous cheeks of the Kim Kardashian.
Okay.
Get it?
Well, there was another piece in the past week over here in the UK from the Observer. Christmas suffers from diminishing returns as festive fare gets smaller. So people are going to pay 25% more for less. We've covered this, of course, years ago. They're treating it like this big revelation in the Observer. Their investigation found shrinkflation. Well, of course, if you look back at Keiser report, we've already covered that. But the point is that this is more austerity for the people. Manufacturers don't want shoppers to notice that they are getting less for their money. So they have become particularly crafty at concealing their shrinking products. While some brands simply reduce the external size of the product and hope no one will notice, many others retain the same packaging but reduce what is inside it or change the shape of the product. So they hide it in new shapes, which brings me to a tweet that you sent regarding this article, and it says, great new way to make an austerity sandwich. There's a $75 toasty where you could put a selfie on it, which combines with Kim Kardashian, but the austerity sandwich, putting a new shape on a bleak sandwich.
Yeah, like, remember finding Jesus on a grilled cheese sandwich. Now you can find Kim Kardashian's in the form of Osborne and Cameron on a grilled cheese sandwich. It all brought to you as a toasty. But, here's the thing about the way the lies are told. In other words, you got a product here in the UK called Quality Street, which is a traditional box of candies or what have you. And so the price this year, not specifically for this product, but across the board for products in general, are up.
The 25 most popular products.
25 most
price went up, quantity went down.
Right, the price goes up a 1%.
Prices went up to 14, 15, 16%.
But they cut the size by 25%.
Yeah.
So in the case of, if you have a product that the price goes up 1% and the portion goes down 25%, you've lost 24%. The actual net inflation is 24%. That's the real inflation. But Osborne or Mark Carney at the Bank of England says inflation in the UK is threatening to be less than 1%. He doesn't mention that portions have shrunk by 25%.
Yeah.
That the debt's risen, by astronomically. So he's only looking at that one little. He's looking at, it's the sound of one hand clapping. Mark Carney. He's not giving the truth. He's not even close to being truthful.
Yeah, the inflation and prices like that are going up, of course, but the deflation. Remember, the fact that all of the stuff, every single thing on Earth, corn, all these buildings, everything is is leveraged up many, many, many times. So that's why they're worried about that deflation of that. That's why they don't care about the inflation in this little tiny Earth that we have here. But finally, I want to talk about the other thing that was not mentioned in regarding all of these, the recession, the looming crash coming, and that's the never-ending war. And recently, America and the UK have been talking about possibly bombing Syria. Well, they are bombing Syria and bombing parts of Iraq. And what they found at FAIR, which is Fair and Accurate in Reporting, and what they found was that no debate in the new war. Study finds little opposition to U.S. attacks on Iraq and Syria. While Congress may soon debate the ongoing U.S. wars in Iraq and Syria, a new FAIR study shows that the critical moments leading up to the escalation of U.S. military action, mainstream media presented almost no debate at all. So the key findings, Max. One, in total, 205 sources appeared on the programs discussing military options in Syria and Iraq. Just 6 of these guests, or 3%, voiced opposition to U.S. military intervention. There were 125 guests, 61%, who spoke in favor of U.S. war. And then finally, on the high-profile Sunday talk shows, 89 guests were invited to talk about the war, but just 1 was against war. So here and all of their guests, by the way, were mostly politicians and military personnel. So what sort of fair and balanced is that?
Well, that's true for the UK and the US.
Yes.
That's right. So this idea in the UK that they have impartiality is another hoax. The BBC claims to be impartial, and yet leading up to wars, they skew their debates with 90% or more pro-war versus a few token people that might come on to be quote-unquote anti-war, and then they're shouted down. Again, they're not impartial. The BBC is a propagandist, full stop.
And this is tying back to the beginning, this is the same way they treat actual hot war, they treat cold war, they treat financial war. They never talk about the banking fraud as a cause of the financial crash. They never talk about all of the ongoing fraud as a reason for the increasing instability in the global economy. That is never introduced, that is never talked about. And in fact, if you talk about it, you get called anti-capitalist.
Yeah, and they never talk about the pro-war generals who go on CNN and they work for defense contractors promoting war.
Yes.
It's like a bond salesman going on the BBC promoting the government should buy more bonds. Duh! You know, but the BBC, unfortunately, this reputation for impartiality is ill-founded. They're the propagandists. They're dangerous propagandists because people actually believe their crisp little British accents more than they do the shouting Bill O'Reillys of the world. Well, that's why people watch Russell Brand, because he's actually giving more of a balanced view on the news. It's the truths. It's the true news. It's if the news were true. All right, Stacey, gotta go. Thanks.
Ciao.
Stay tuned for the second half. A whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. A surprise guest in the studio today, Reggie Middleton of BoomBustBlog.com and UltraCoin. Reggie, welcome into the studio. Keiser Report.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
All right, so now UltraCoin. I mean, this is interesting. You've got the cryptocurrency bug. You know, you made those fantastic calls when you were really as an analyst, and everyone remembers these calls. But the crypto bug is now firmly bitten you. What's going on with UltraCoin? What is UltraCoin?
Well, UltraCoin is a wallet that you can use to make smart contracts. Smart contracts are self-executing code, self-enforcing code that take what would be a legal contract and makes it unbreachable, an agreement between two people. So now you could do business with anybody. You don't have to trust anybody, you don't have to know anybody, and you don't have to worry about their credit situation, counterparty risk, etc.
So you're really using the blockchain technology to make it easy for people to create contracts with each other.
Exactly.
And including financial contracts.
Exactly. And the gist of it is, it takes out the middlemen, the rent seekers. Those who seek rent without adding the requisite value are now not needed.
Okay, so UltraCoin is not actually a coin.
No.
Okay, so it is the blockchain technology, however, that refers back to Bitcoin, which was the kind of the original crypto blockchain technology, which is now sweeping the globe and taking on, I guess you could call this Bitcoin 2.0, in fact.
Yeah, Bitcoin 2.5, if you say it, because it is just purely smart contract driven, and I like to reiterate, it is 100% Bitcoin technology. No side chains, no altcoins, Bitcoin in, Bitcoin out. Our first product, UltraCoin, disintermediates Wall Street banks. We could trade over 45,000 tickers, any asset class, any geographic exchange, peer-to-peer. You don't need an exchange, you don't need a broker, you don't need a bank, and it's safer. and is actually more accurate because you do very, very specific exposures. Everybody I've demonstrated this with in the financial sector has been wowed because they're thinking of Bitcoin as a currency or a payment system. Payment systems, Bitcoin 1.0, currency, 1.0, 1.5. You have Bitcoin 2.0, which is using the blockchain, and then Bitcoin 2.5. I believe that our product is the most advanced implementation of smart contracts available.
Okay, so it sounds like you say get rid of the middlemen, get rid of the intermediaries. Clearly, there's a group of people that don't like that idea, the entrenched oligarchy, which would be Wall Street. Jamie Dimon said, I think last week or the week before, that talking about Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin's trying to eat our lunch. Okay, so he clearly recognizes this is a competitive threat. How much of a competitive threat is this to somebody like JP Morgan?
Well, we're going after dinner, not lunch, okay? And what well, let's not pick on JP Morgan, but we can use them as an example. I've approached most of the money center banks. I'm a New York native and resident. One or two of the banks are very interested. What they're doing is they're outsourcing their R&D through various venturing arms. They're interested, but most of them say, if you think you could take us out, I'm not going to mention which banks, but if you think you could take us out, go at it. You can't beat us, and we've been doing this for XYZ years. Well, that's what the media companies said when Google started. Okay, that's what a lot of the ad companies said when Google started the internet. What Bitcoin is, it's a protocol and value transfer ecosystem. It is not a currency. Just like the internet is not a website. Okay, those who poo-poo the internet, the media industry, the record industry, the music industry, the ad industry, the retail industry, etc. When was the last time you rented a Blockbuster video? When was the last time you used a classified?
Well, what's going to happen in Western Union? Because now we were talking about this on the show for a year or so, in the area of remittances,
right.
Which is a huge area for money transmitters and Forex transmitters, Western Union being a big brand name. They would seem like they're about to go the way of the dodo, because using Bitcoin technology as a means of transfer mechanism right. is 99% cheaper. So is that? I mean, do you think Western Union and these other types of similar businesses would be, they have to either adapt or they'll be put out of business?
Right, you have two choices. Either adapt, see, Western Union charges a lot, but there are other companies that don't charge as much. So the problem is Bitcoin transmission is so inexpensive and the barriers to entry is so low, it's open source, that you have a race to get in. You have BitPay and Coinbase and the Bitcoin startups using new technology, and then you have the stalwarts, the legacy systems. Now PayPal, they've arrived, but you have American Express, Western Union, etc. You're going to drive margins down very low, then margins are going to hit zero. And then margins are going to invert and go negative, which means that they will pay merchants to do their processing. The only way you can do that is to upsell them with other products. What other products are going to upsell them? It has to be the smart contract products. So they're going to come to me regardless.
So it's like Ryanair, these discount airlines. They don't make any money actually selling tickets. They make money on upselling
right.
for getting better seating,
right.
buying stuff on the plane. So it's a loss leader,
right.
essentially.
Right.
So merchant processing will be a loss leading business.
Exactly. But there are still a lot of entities who believe that they can make money at a loss. And you simply can't do that.
Well, that reminded me of .com 1.0 back in the late 90s up until 2000. And then you had this huge crash. And there's a lot of quiet period there for 2 or 3 years. And then you had what was called Internet 2.0,
right.
where at the emergence, and I want to talk to you about a couple of these companies. Facebook would definitely be in that category. Twitter came along a little later. Let's talk about stock market for a second. So Facebook is twice the size of the IPO. Twitter is down nearly 50% from a post-IPO peak. So getting into this whole social networking site. So put your analyst hat on for a second, because you have made fantastic calls. You were saying buy Google, sell Apple, which turned out to be for over an 18-month period of time a fantastic trade. How do you see these social networking stocks currently?
Okay. Well, my issue with social networking stocks is the banking system. They overprice the IPOs. Facebook is an interesting concept, interesting business. They were cash flowing, and then they priced it 3 or 4 times what it should have been. And when natural market forces got a hold of it, nature took, gravity took hold. Twitter, similarly. Facebook has potential. It's still, we don't know where it's going to go, but they have a significant audience. They're not growing. As a matter of fact, I still think they're going negative. So what Facebook is doing is Facebook is buying growth. Okay, but that's not being recognized in the analytical community. So when they buy WhatsApp or when they bought Instagram, they're basically buying eyeballs. They bought WhatsApp and they have Facebook Messenger, an exact replica of what WhatsApp is. But they weren't buying the technology, they're buying the users. Internationally, WhatsApp is very popular. So number one, you have to recognize that. If you do recognize that, it should change the valuation and outlook of Facebook. But that doesn't necessarily make it negative, it just makes it different. Twitter is a different story. Very large captive audience. How are they going to make money? They don't know. I don't know, but I have a strong idea that management doesn't know either.
Okay.
So
well, Facebook certainly is. It's over $200 billion, I think, in market cap. It's a big part of NASDAQ. It's one of the most highly capitalized companies in the United States at this time. When you talk about Facebook possibly being a bit, rich at these levels, what about the NASDAQ itself? Because NASDAQ back in before the dot-com crash of 2000 was trading above 5,000. You had to pull back down to that 1,500 level, I believe. It was a huge wipeout. It's come back now. It's over 4,000. It's kind of hinting it might get to a higher level. What about NASDAQ as a whole? Because David Cameron here in the UK just said that he felt that the markets around the world are about to crash. Why he would decide to make this statement at this time, right before an election, it's anybody's guess. But that's how do you weigh in on this idea? Are things a little bit stretched?
Well, before I decide whether I agree with him or not, a lot of people probably wouldn't go to their hedge fund advisor and ask him for political advice. So I wouldn't probably go to a politician and ask him for investment advisory advice. But on that note, they're rich. Personally, I would not come in from the outside and invest. They're rich, extremely rich. You have, like, Twitter. Twitter doesn't know how it's going to make money significantly in the future, and they have a very rich valuation. You have certain companies that are richer in valuation than the vast majority of legacy companies that have been in business for 50 years and making money. When you have a newcomer come in that makes less money, but has a valuation 2 or 3 times what the stalwarts are, you have to question it. No matter how fast they grow, would it justify? So they are rich, they are going to correct, but they're not going to correct on their own, because I still am very bearish on the EU sovereign debt crisis issue. The banking system in the US, the UK as well, and much of the EU in the periphery is still exactly in the situation it was in 2007, except about twice as bad. So, we've been kicking the can for quite some time. We're running out of road soon. Timing is difficult, but the fundamental situation, the macro situation, is obvious.
Let me throw something in, which we didn't. I don't know if you have any opinion on this whatsoever, but let me just throw the dice here and just talk a little bit about what's happening in Japan. Because when the Federal Reserve Bank in the U.S. stopped their QE3 program, the very next day, Japan announced their QE program. I think it's number 12,
right?
Because they started QE 20 years ago. And so on a global basis, money printing has expanded. It's not shrinking. There has been no tapering whatsoever. And you look at Japan, they just went into a recession again. This is a triple dip recession. The stock market's having a little trouble, shaky here. And their Abenomics program, which is massive Keynesian debt finance spending to try to kickstart that economy, it looks like we're getting to a point of recognizing its failure. So the question is, Japan economy looks like it's about ready to collapse again, but does it have enough global influence to trigger a Lehman-like global collapse? Well, I think the way I see it, I would kind of think that that's an appropriate analogy, but what are your thoughts?
Well, basically, you're looking for a run on the bank. Japan has a slightly different structure than most of the other countries. But you also have to look at it from a realistic perspective. They're on their 33rd year of their lost decade. The last time I checked, the lost decade was 10 years. At some point you have to admit it's not a lost decade. It's permanently, structurally their solution is broken. They're over 200% debt ratio with their funding, but their funding is owned primarily by Japanese citizens, so you don't have that independent run. If you have a run on other assets, which is quite likely, then that would trigger the panic with everybody else. That would be the Asian flu 2.0. Okay, I don't think it's going to happen with the Japanese government bonds, but that's not the scariest money. The scariest money would be the Japanese equity market, or potentially the Japanese real estate market. And if it drops significantly, it's just going to cause everybody to recognize what's the truth everywhere else, that equity markets are simply out of control. You had 0% money for 4 or 5 years. 4 or 5 years of ZERP with no true economic activity to
Zero
support
interest rate policy.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
So getting back to Ultracoin, because we got about a minute left. So given all these instabilities in the markets and the banks not really solving their problems, just printing more money, I would think that this would be a boom for Ultracoin, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, because this is the solution. In other words, if people can get out from underneath these banks that don't seem to want to get, act in a lawful way.
Well, like I said, with Ultracoin, you can do transactions with no counterparty risk and credit risk. A lot of entities say, well, I don't have that much risk with the bank now. And, we can go down. Man Financial, 100% loss on the assets. Lehman Brothers, you had your assets in there. You got them back 7 years later, hopefully.
MF Global.
MF Global, you had Countrywide, Washington Mutual, Bear Stearns, could run down the list. Here you had HBOS here,
AIG.
BlackRock. Yeah, we could do
Well,
this
I don't
all
see
day.
how can
right?
people not recognize. All right, we got to go. That's a good list to think, to ponder while thinking about Ultracoin. Reggie, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
You're very welcome.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report. With me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert, I'd like to thank our guest, Reggie Middleton of BoomBustBlog.com. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.